All right, well, I'm so excited to see so many of you here for this program. I'm really happy to introduce to you my friend Sarah Rosenson. She and I were colleagues at Moorestown Friends together in the religion department. Many of you know that I taught preschool through 6th grade Quakerism. Sarah wore many hats while she was there, all in the religion department. She taught upper school, which included ethics, world religions, Bible. She then also added in 7th and 8th grade. She did sacred stories. She's taught Quaker history and religion. I know I've left something out. Close enough? Okay. Anyway, she is here today to share with her relationship to a group called Land for All and their possible other solution for the Palestinian and Israeli long-standing issues. So, Sarah, I will turn it over to you. And
thank you, Lynn. Can people in the back hear me? Fantastic. And is this working for you? Excellent. Okay. Thank you so much for having me here at Medford meeting. I am not Quaker. I am a Jewish person, but I am very Quaker adjacent. In my childhood, I went to Quaker school for several years, and I taught at Moorestown Friends with Lynn. So I feel very comfortable here and always happy to be in a Quaker community. I also like how things are set up right now because I think by default it means I get all the cookies because they're back here. Before I jump in, I want to say a couple of logistical things. First of all, I would like to get the word out about the approach and the group I'm going to talk to you about today to as many people as possible. So if after having heard this presentation, you think you know any other group that might like to hear it, please let me know. Lynn has my contact information. If you, for instance, live at Medford Lees and you think there are other people at Medford Lees, or you have a friend or a family member who belongs to another congregation anywhere in the country, because it can be on Zoom, I would love to do this presentation. Please let me know. Also, my presentation will take about 30 minutes. And then if any of you are interested, I'd be happy to spend some time sharing thoughts, ideas, questions, discussion. Obviously, if at any point during this process you need to leave, feel free. I would just ask that you do it as quietly as possible. All right, so today I want to introduce you to an organization called A Land for All, which is a group of Israelis and Palestinians promoting a vision that I believe could lead to peace. Maybe the only one that I have heard of recently where I thought, yeah, that could work. I'm going to share with you why I support this group, and I'm going to make this a combination of the personal and political, and I hope that by sharing personal experiences and thought processes, some of you may recognize some of the same issues that you or other people you know have been wrestling with. I was raised by two Jewish parents who had no interest in practicing Judaism, and we did not. They thought, we have science now, why do we need religion anymore? And frankly, fair point, right? We did not practice Judaism. We never belonged to or attended a synagogue. I never went to Hebrew school, didn't celebrate becoming bat mitzvah, and so on. And I don't remember my parents ever talking about Israel with us. I always knew that I was Jewish, but I didn't know anything about Judaism. For reasons I will not bore you with now, in my mid to late 20s, I started exploring my Jewish identity and ended up falling in love with Jewish holidays, services, texts, values. Part of my self-education was to learn about Israel and Israeli history. Excuse me. I read histories and autobiographies written by both Jews and Palestinians. and I learned more about Jewish history than I had learned in high school and college. As a result of my study, I came to some conclusions. First of all, this tiny piece of land truly is the homeland of the Jewish people. It also truly is the homeland of the Palestinian people, many of whom have lived there for centuries, for generations. I also understand that in an ideal world, there would be a nation with a majority of Jewish citizens, so that if a nightmare scenario started to happen in any country where Jews live, they could go to that country and be safe. On the need for a Jewish state, Jewish history is full of violence, persecution, and discrimination against Jews. This includes crusades, inquisitions, expulsion of Jewish populations, pogroms, and genocide. Therefore, there is a need for a majority Jewish state, a country where Jews would never be killed, persecuted, discriminated against, or expelled simply because they are Jewish. I also learned more about the founding of Israel. In 1947, the nations of the world voted at the United Nations that there would be a Jewish state in Israel, when the British mandate ended in May of 1948. The land was to be partitioned into two countries, an Arab country and a Jewish country. And this is what the partition plan looked like. The blue is the Jewish state, and the orange is the Arab state. Now, I think anyone looking at this would say, this is completely unworkable. I mean, this is crazy, right? And I don't know how many people who know that there was a partition plan know what it looked like. And when I first saw this, I was like, what is this piece of Swiss cheese? What am I looking at? This is crazy. Neither group has a contiguous piece of land with defensible borders. It doesn't make sense. Why was it chopped up in such a bizarre way? Because 2/3 of the people living there were Palestinian. So to sort of group together the places where at least 50% of the people living there were Jewish, it had to look like this. The Jews said yes to this plan, and the Arabs said no. So I think it's important to understand why the Arabs said no to this. Nothing at all about this plan makes any sense from the Palestinian perspective. The United Nations voted to do this, but the people actually living there didn't get to vote. And again, the people living there, a large majority of them were Palestinians. This was forced on them completely against their will. The nations of the world felt guilty, rightly so, I think, about the murders of 6 million Jews during World War II. And in a real sense, the Palestinians paid dearly for the Holocaust, although they had nothing to do with perpetrating it. So in 1948, the surrounding Arab nations attacked the newborn state of Israel. During that war, Israel gained a lot more territory, and 700,000 Palestinians were uprooted from their homes. So this is a quote from less than a year ago by a famous, well-known Israeli historian, Benny Morris. At the end of 1947, the United Nations proposed to divide the country into two states. In 1948, there were 1.3 million Arabs in Palestine and 650,000 Jews there. The Jews said yes, but the Arabs of Palestine said no and started shooting. It evolved into a full-scale Arab-Israeli war. Israel eventually won, and 700,000 Arabs were uprooted from their homes, most ending up as refugees in the West Bank and in Gaza. And this is not on my notes, but I have to add it because of this week's realities. Some of those refugees ended up in southern Lebanon. So when we're talking about why Hezbollah is fighting, why Hezbollah formed, it's not a different set of issues from Gaza and the West Bank. It's the same set of issues. During the war, many Palestinians fled or were forced out of their homes. They left their houses, their farms, their businesses, their villages, their towns, and it did not occur to any of them that they would never be allowed to return. They thought they would return when the war was over and there was peace and safety again. But Israel never did let them return. Israel never did let them return, and neither they nor their descendants have ever been allowed to go back. And that's how Israel ensured there would be a majority of Jewish citizens in Israel. So I understand why the Palestinians are so angry and have been angry for all these decades. And once I understood all this, I concluded, along with many other people, that the only way to achieve a lasting peace in the region would be for Palestinians to have their own nation. I thought 2 nation states side by side would be the answer. Palestinians, too, would have self-determination and national sovereignty. The Palestinian state would be in the West Bank and Gaza. The 2 states would have closed borders segregating the 2 peoples. Jews would live in Israel and Palestinians in Palestine. I did everything I could think of to do as an American Jew to help bring about that kind of 2-state solution. In the early 2000s, I volunteered with a group called the Refuser Solidarity Network and organized a speaking tour for one of the refusers, who stayed with us for a week and spoke at our synagogue, among other places. The refusers were IDF soldiers, that is, Israeli military officers, who were done with their active duty but still had to do reserve duty. Hundreds of them signed public letters risking arrest and jail, saying they would do anything in defense of the state of Israel, but they would not do their reserve duty in the occupied territories. They said the occupation was terrible for the Palestinians because it denied them basic rights, and also terrible for Israelis because it created more anger and therefore more risk of violence. I also did both paid and volunteer work for the American Friends of Neve Shalom Wahat al-Salam. Neve Shalom Wahat al-Salam means oasis of peace in Hebrew and Arabic. It's a coexistence village in Israel where Jews and Arabs choose to live together in a 50-50 ratio. Most importantly, they have a school where every classroom has a Jewish teacher and a Palestinian teacher. Students become fluent in both Hebrew and Arabic, and they learn the histories and worldviews of both groups. Back then, I hoped that all the wonderful people working on these projects and all of the movements they represented would change the hearts and minds of Israelis so they would allow a Palestinian state to be created. But as I will explain, that is not what happened. In 2007, my family traveled to Israel. It is such an amazing, beautiful, fascinating country. Raise your hand if you've been to Israel. I'm not suggesting you go as a tourist right now. But if, God willing, there were ever peace, it's just a phenomenally interesting and beautiful place. And we did all the usual tourist stuff. Me and my kids, both of whom graduated from Moorestown Friends School, and my husband at the wall there, up on the Temple Mount, where there used to be a Jewish temple, but now there's Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, which from the outside is the most spectacular building I've ever seen. Here we are in Jaffa, looking at the modern city of Tel Aviv on the Mediterranean coast. Some of the nights we were there, we stayed in the guest house at the coexistence village, Neve Shalom Wahat al-Salam, and on the last night we were there, We hosted all of our friends for dinner there, so this is me and my husband and my kids with the refuser and his family and the, various people that we had met who are Israelis. All of these people had had us in their homes when we visited Israel. Unfortunately, this was 17 years ago. I have lost track with all of them, but they are wonderful people. In 2010, our daughter was confirmed, and part of the confirmation process at our synagogue was going to Israel over spring break with the rabbi and education director. So here's Esther with a camel. In his senior year at Moorestown Friends, Jake went through the college application process and then deferred his admission for a year so he could take a gap year. He spent the first 5 months on a kibbutz in Israel near Haifa. And so on the left here is our son Jacob with a couple of his friends from the kibbutz. I think this is actually in Jordan near Petra. So to bring this back to the current situation, I have grown increasingly frustrated over the last quarter century. During that time, many things have happened. Diplomatic opportunities have been taken and have been missed. Violence has been committed by both sides against the other. But one fundamental fact has made a two-state solution, as we used to think of it, completely impossible. Over the last 25 years, Israel has doubled the number of Jewish settlers in the West Bank. So in 1970, there were 1,500 Jewish settlers in the West Bank. And as of this year, there's more than 500,000. So that old idea that there would be a Jewish state in what are now the borders of Israel and a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza, it's not possible anymore. There's not a contiguous piece of land in the West Bank in which you could say, okay, this is going to be the Palestinian state. Now, one party to this conflict had the power to ensure that the traditional two-state solution would never happen and could never happen. And that's Israel, by putting all these settlements here. Israel has effectively annexed the West Bank. And as I'm sure you've been reading, settlers in the West Bank have been perpetrating violence on Palestinian people, their homes, their land, and often they suffer no consequences. For years now, when I've seen story after story about the Israeli government approving more settlements, I have been baffled. I don't understand the plan. I don't understand the end game. Palestinians are denied basic human rights. The Israeli government controls their lives, but they cannot vote in Israeli elections. They do not have self-determination or natural sovereignty or freedom of movement. And the Israeli government seems content to keep it that way forever. And I kept thinking, if you deny people their rights forever, they will explode. The events of October 7th, 2023 were shocking and horrific. Hamas committed grotesque acts of violence that constituted crimes against humanity. So in one sense, Hamas is clearly to blame for the tragic current situation of both Israelis and Gazans. But anyone who looks at this situation as if it started on October 7th last year is refusing to see all of the history I've been talking about up to now, and I would argue will not be able to understand how to ensure that nothing like this ever happens again. Since October 7th, I have had nightmares about the horror, Israeli hostages and their families are facing. I have also had nightmares about Palestinian babies who died because there was no electricity for their incubators. To give kind of a visual Jewish ritual view of this, when my husband and I are home on Friday nights, we welcome in the Jewish Sabbath with blessings over candles and wine. The double candlestick you see here out of Jerusalem stone, we got at Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Jerusalem, and we've been using it since our trip to Israel in 2007. The third candle we've been lighting every Friday night since October 7th for all of the innocent victims of violence in Israel and Palestine. The Israeli army has now killed more than 40,000 people in Gaza, most of them civilians, and forced many times that number of people to leave their homes. Lack of food, water, shelter, and medical care has created starvation and a massive public health crisis. This is not only profoundly unethical behavior, it is also utterly irrational as a path to protecting Israelis from future violence. Every Palestinian who has lost a loved one to Israeli bombs is now more likely than they ever were before to take up arms against Israel. To my mind, this latest war has really forced the issue. I said at the beginning that I think it's important to have a Jewish state. But here's the question we're actually facing. Can we support a Jewish state if it means permanently denying another people their basic human rights? And my understanding of the teaching of my religion is no. Every year at Passover, we remember the Exodus from Egypt. And what do we learn from that? What does the Torah teach us? You shall not wrong a stranger or oppress him, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the feelings of the stranger, having yourselves been strangers in the land of Egypt. I believe the only way to eventually have peace is to ensure that all Palestinians and all Israelis have basic human rights. Since Israel has foreclosed the two-state option as we used to think of it, we are left with the following choices. The one-state solution would mean one country on the land now referred to as Israel, Gaza, and the West Bank. Every Jew and every Palestinian would have a vote. Every Jew and every Palestinian could live wherever they want. I think in many ways, this might be the best solution. This is not a state that has a Jewish majority in any sense. The other option is the idea of a two-state confederation. And this is what A Land for All promotes. Borders would be set between the two states along the 1967 lines, but they would be open, which is to say, Israelis would be allowed to live in Palestine as Israeli citizens and Palestinian residents. Palestinians would be allowed to live anywhere in Israel as Palestinian citizens and Israeli residents. Everyone would vote in their country of citizenship. The 500,000 Jewish settlers could stay where they are, but they would be living in the nation of Palestine. And any Palestinian could live in Haifa or Tel Aviv in the nation of Israel. So I strongly support this approach, and I want to encourage all of you to explore their website and see if you do as well. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes now about A Land for All, and then, as I said, we can have discussion. The acronym A Land for All, in English, it's ALPHA, so I'm going to refer to it as ALPHA. ALPHA has two co-directors, one Israeli and one Palestinian. First of all, this is their website, alandforall.org. The first time you put it in, it will probably come up, it'll all be in Hebrew. Up at the top, you can click on the Arabic, if you're good at Arabic. Or there's a little thing that says EN. Click on that if you want to see it in English, okay? I won't read the whole biographies, but the co-directors, one is a Jewish Israeli, one is Palestinian. They are working together on this along with a board made up of both Jews and Palestinians. So their tagline is 2 states, 1 homeland. Why 2 states, 1 homeland? We've heard a lot recently, especially last spring when students were protesting on campuses about the phrase from the river to the sea, from the river to the sea. And here's the truth that Alpha is based on. The entire area from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea is in fact the homeland of the Jewish people. And the entire area from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea is in fact also the homeland of the Palestinian people. And both groups want sovereignty in their homeland. So here's what we're talking about. Along here, the Jordan River. Up at the top there on this map, I think it's called Lake Tiberias, but often referred to as the Sea of Galilee. In Hebrew, it's called the Kinneret because it's shaped like a harp, and the word for harp is Kinneret. Runs through the Dead Sea. On where my shadow is right now, that's the country of Jordan, and then the Mediterranean Sea is over there. So it's divided up right now into Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. But all of it, from the river to the sea, is the homeland of each of these 2 groups of people. So from the Land for All website, and I know that we're getting to some slides that might be hard to read, but I will read them for you if you can't read it. There is a deep emotional need for partnership in this land. When Palestinians say Palestine, they refer to the entire area between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean. Just as when Israelis say Eretz Israel, they refer to the same space. The homeland is one and the same, even if it is called by different names. No international borders could change these connections, this identity. No international borders could sever Palestinians' ties to Jaffa, Haifa, or Lod any more than they could sever Jewish ties to Hebron, Nablus, or Bethlehem. So that's, a Land for All is based on this idea. All of it belongs to both of us. And so anybody from either group should be able to live anywhere in their historical homeland. So the idea is 2 sovereign nations with set borders, but every Jew and every Palestinian could live and work wherever they want in either country. So the entire historical homeland would be open to everybody in both groups. So this shares some elements with the current idea of the European Union. Any French citizen today can live and work in Germany. They remain citizens of France. They vote in French elections, not German elections. But they can live and work anywhere in the European Union, and vice versa. So it's sort of like that. So what about addressing past injustices? These last few quotes, all the last few slides, all the quotes are from the Land for All website. Citizens of the Palestinian state, including former refugees, would be eligible for residency status in Israel and have all the rights conferred by such status, including the right to vote for local authorities, not in national elections, but local. To avoid inundation, as a first step, agreement would be reached on a significant number of Palestinian refugees who would be eligible for residency in the state of Israel. The vision is that at the end of the process, any Palestinian, including former refugees, will be able to live anywhere in the shared homeland within Israel or within the Palestinian state. The phases leading up to the fulfillment of this vision will be implemented mutually and by consent. Such a model would allow, on the one hand, Palestinians to return to the historical homeland from which they were exiled or expelled, and on the other, enable Jewish Israelis to maintain the character of the State of Israel. Arrangements will be put in place for the restoration of refugee property lost or expropriated, or compensation for it, without creating new injustices. So I think partly what they're thinking of there, imagine a beautiful 100-year-old home in what we currently call the State of Israel, and there's a family living there, 2 parents in their 30s, 2 little kids. Those people were not alive in 1948, right? I think what they mean about not creating new injustices and compensation is the descendants of the Palestinians who lived in that home in 1948 should not be able to come and say, okay, we're kicking you guys out, this is our house, because that creates a new injustice. But they should be compensated. So they're trying to think through what would it mean, what would it look like if after all this time refugees were allowed to return. So this group, A Land for All, is trying to think those things through. So what about security? This is from the Land for All website. Under this plan, Palestine and Israel will have independent security forces. Only Palestinian forces will operate in Palestinian territory. Only Israeli forces will operate in Israel. However, the 2 countries will cooperate closely on matters of security, intelligence, and policing. Having free movement between Israel and Palestine does not preclude either country from denying entry to hostile individuals or having border checks where necessary. The borders will be open, not lawless. Security cooperation will also apply to guarding the outer borders separating Israel-Palestine and the countries surrounding them. The 2 countries will sign a mutual defense treaty that will forbid any foreign military from entering either of their territories without the consent of the other country. Now, obviously, at this moment in history, these 2 groups of people do not trust each other. And they each think, with good reason, that the other is prone to violence. My dream, like this is obviously not something that's going to happen anytime soon, but if someday the vision of A Land for All could be implemented, it seems to me it would be kind of like mutual assured destruction, the way it's set up currently between nuclear powers, right? Yeah, Russia could send a nuclear weapon into the United States at any moment. But they know that then we could do the same to them. So the hope is nobody's ever going to do it. I think in this situation, if the populations of Israelis and Palestinians are mixed like this, there's lots of Jews and lots of Palestinians in every part of the territory. If bad things start happening, if the government of the nation of Palestine starts letting bad things happen to their Jewish residents, well, there's a lot of Palestinians living in Israel, and Israel could retaliate. So I'm thinking, if this was ever implemented, each country would have a strong incentive to protect the residents of the other country living in their country because of all of their citizens living in the other country, if that makes sense. And this is from an email I got from them a few months ago about security, the fundamental point. All the devastation and loss will not change the fact that all of us, Jews and Palestinians, are children of this land, and none of us are going anywhere. There is no military solution to this conflict, and continued warfare will only bring more and more death. Only a solution based on national and civil equality, 2 states in a shared homeland, can provide security for us all. In their vision, Jerusalem would be a shared city and the capital of both states, with a special municipal government managed jointly and equally by both states. So I'm going to stop now and take any questions, comments, thoughts, insults, anything you want to throw at me. I encourage you, please, if this has been intriguing to you, go to alandforall.org, click on the EN at the top if English is the best of your languages and not Hebrew and Arabic, and explore it and see what you think. And support them if you feel, as I do, that this might be the only thing I've heard that could work. That could work, because I don't think there's a military solution. And again, if you know any other congregation or civic group or anything at all that might like to hear this presentation, please let me know, or let Lynn know. She knows how to reach me. I would love to do it for as many people as possible. All right. Yes.
Thank you for this. So it seems like a lot of American politicians seem to be incapable of having a coherent conversation about this issue, and I kind of appreciate that because it's so complicated and I don't have to worry about people voting for me. My question is, I mean, this just makes so much sense. Do you know if this organization is doing anything to actually communicate with people like representatives in Congress to give them this as an idea to plant in their head so that they actually have something coherent to say when someone asks them about what's happening over there? Our government has apparently, at least not at the moment, it doesn't seem like, but a pretty big influence, at least on the Israeli government. And it seems like, this needs to be out there as an option. So, do you know if any, I don't want to use the word lobbying, but are presentations like this made available to members of Congress? Do you know?
I do not know that that is happening. I will tell you, I mean, you're absolutely right. The American government has tremendous influence over Israel. So I would love to see those presentations happening. I think the group A Land for All is focusing on its work in Israel. They need to get as many Israelis and Palestinians on. Israelis and Palestinians need to be clamoring for this, in my mind. I think we are years, possibly generations away from that actually happening, but that's where they're focusing. And I will tell you, there is, if you go to the website, there is something you can click on that says American Friends of a Land for All, something like that. So back when I first found this website, I contacted American Friends for Land for All. I said, this is great. Do you have a speakers bureau? I might want to invite speakers to come give presentations. And they said, no. Really, what we're doing is trying to raise money for the group in Israel that's doing the work in Israel. I said, what if I gave presentations? He said, that would be great. Aaron, I don't know where Aaron lives, but Aaron is the contact for American Friends of a Land for All. I kind of am the Speakers Bureau, as near as I can tell, for A Land for All at the moment. And no congressman or senator has invited me to their office. But I would say, after these elections, I'm going to write to my senators, who will be your senators, and my congressperson about this. And I would encourage all of you, however it is that you feel about this issue, write to them, right? And that's why I want to talk to as many people as possible. You're Quakers. I know you're activists, right? You know what to do. Make phone calls, write letters. I don't like to focus on the money part because I know congregations are, also need donations from their members, and I'm not trying to, but however you feel comfortable supporting whoever you think is doing good work on peace, do it. And if A Land for All is intriguing to you, add them to your list. Yeah.
Before you went into all the detail about A Land for All, you mentioned another possibility, which you sounded like you liked. Could you expound on that? It's different from this one?
Oh, a one-state solution. Is that what you mean?
Maybe.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, the problem with that, for me, is that I know enough about Jewish history to still feel that it would be good if there was a country in the world that had a majority of Jewish citizens. And the approach of a land for all still has that. There is still a state of Israel where the law would be that if, Nazis took over the government of some country, the Jews of that country could go there. And the one-state solution does not offer that. Other than that, like if that's not something that you're focused on, yes. I mean, certainly you could say the most fair and just solution here is just to have one country. One country. And everybody who lives there is a citizen, and every adult has one vote. And it's not particularly a Jewish state. It's just whoever lives there, among Jews and Palestinians. And that would certainly address Palestinian historical injustices perpetrated against Palestinians historically.
So today, how many Israelis and how many Palestinians would be in this nation, if it was one nation?
Well,
They would be together. What percentage would be Jewish? What percentage?
I think if you looked at the number of people who currently live in the West Bank and Gaza and Israel, it would be about 50-50. But there's also Palestinians who fled or were, whatever left in 1948, whose descendants now live in Lebanon, the United States, England, France, a whole variety of countries. So we don't know how many of them would say, okay, now I can return. Or how many of them would say, now I'm an American, I'm not going to go back. So it's not easy to answer that, because part of the problem here is the Palestinian refugees are mostly in Lebanon and the West Bank and Gaza, but there are also a bunch, and I don't know the number, all over the world. And if they were all given the right to go back, what would they do? We don't know. So I should be clear, with the approach of a land for all, because that's kind of an open question, if any Palestinian, including descendants of people who were uprooted from their homes in 1948, could live anywhere in this land, I don't know that the people living in the state of Israel would be a majority of Jews, depending on how many Palestinians come back and whether they want to live in what is now called Israel or whether they want to live in the West Bank or reconstructed Gaza. But the voting citizens of that country, the majority of them would be would be Jewish. Is this making any sense?
So what about other Jewish people choosing to go to that new country? Are you talking about
Israel.
Palestinians coming back?
Israel, if you are a Jew anywhere in the world, you can go to Israel and live there and become a citizen. That's been true since the founding of the state of Israel. Israel would love it, if the 6 million of us who live in the United States went to Israel. That they try to recruit, they give free trips to kids, all this kind of stuff. But most of us have decided, America seems cool, we're going to stay here. But yes.
But if it were peaceful and a good place to live, that would change somewhat.
Yes, it's possible that Jews from various countries in the world would move to this country. That's an unknown. But that's been true. That ability has been there for the entire history of the state of Israel.
I know that.
For Palestinians, it is not there. So I don't know. You're right. We don't know how many Jews would decide to go there, and we don't know how many Palestinians would decide to go there, and in what part of the land they would want to live. Yeah.
How do you rid Israel of Hamas, of the terrorists? They're being fed into there by Iran.
Yep.
In order to, create this one state.
Okay. So Hamas You mean Hamas and Gaza?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great question. Here's what I believe. This makes sense to me, and you all can tell me if this makes sense to you. There is no military solution here, which I feel very comfortable saying in a room full of Quakers, right? Peace testimony. The reason groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, the extremist groups, the violent groups, the groups who tend towards the religious extremism, I think the reason they become popular and attractive to some percentage of the population, not all Palestinians by any means, but some, is because there's been 75 years of denial of basic human rights, and people have had it up to here. That's when an extremist group becomes attractive. To me, the way to defang Hamas and Hezbollah is to say, yes, what happened in 1948 was a disaster for the Palestinian people. And we're going to put in place something like A Land for All is proposing, which means any Palestinian can live anywhere between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. I think pretty quickly, Palestinians would say, fantastic, I'm going to settle in my homeland. I'm going to be a citizen of the state of Palestine. And I can live anywhere I want in my historic homeland. All of a sudden, Hamas and Hezbollah, like, what are they preaching? They're preaching, we want our historic homeland, and we're going to take it by violence. Well, what if it happened not by violence?
Yeah. But isn't Israel preaching that? I mean, they are moving away from the two-state solution. They are suggesting at some point they're going to take Gaza and the West Bank as Israel and push the Palestinians out. And I don't feel, as Americans, we do have influence over Israel. They are doing exactly what they want, and we're complicit.
Yeah, if you're asking, do I see any hope the current government of Israel is going to move in this direction? The answer is no. And all I can hope is that soon or someday, enough Israelis are going to come to the realization, like, the one thing I think we know for sure is if we continue on the path that the Israeli government is taking, there will be more violence forever. And eventually people are going to say, you know what might? The only thing that could actually reduce and eventually end the violence is for everybody to have full and equal human rights. Do I see that happening like next week? Next year? No. But did that answer your question at all?
Yeah, I mean, it just looks very dark.
It does. Oh my gosh, it does. And I would say, and I'm sure a lot of you know this from all the issues you've worked on in your lives, it feels so dark right now, and I feel so helpless. And the thing that helps when things are dark and helpless is to try to do whatever little thing you can think to do about it, which for me in this case is this.
I believe.
Yeah.
What does it mean to say that that territory, Mediterranean to the Jordan, is the homeland? What does homeland mean? Because that seems to be the emotional driver. What does that mean to say they're homeland? What does it mean? Did they originate there? What does it mean? Did they share it as a homeland? I don't quite know what that means, and I think it's important because that's the basis upon which you might get anywhere.
Okay. So what does homeland mean? That's a fantastic question. And I don't know that I'm qualified to answer it from the Palestinian perspective. But I do know that there have been Palestinians living in the area between the river and the sea for for hundreds of years, for many generations. I think it's true. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, like I think, the most sacred Christian site in Jerusalem. There are so many Christian denominations who sort of argue about how to handle it and how to keep it up and all that kind of stuff. It's a Muslim Palestinian family that has the key to the building and comes every day and opens the building, right? So it goes back a long way. Palestinians, Arab Muslims in this land go back a long way.
So it's
But
generational settlement.
Generational settlement. And of course, the Dome of the Rock there, that's, when Muhammad took his miraculous night ride from Mecca to Jerusalem. It's been a long time since I taught world religions. Mecca to Jerusalem, I think, in one night on a horse. That's where he went up to heaven and met other prophets and God and stuff like that at that spot. So it's very holy for them. Now, from the Jewish perspective, this goes back literally thousands of years. I think there have been Jews in that land 4,000 years. And it was in the year 70 that the Romans destroyed the Second Temple. Ever since then, in any Jewish synagogue you go into, when you're praying, you're oriented towards Jerusalem. At the end of our Passover Seder, we say, next year in Jerusalem. So it's, yeah. Yes?
It seems to me the genesis of all of this is when God led the people out of slavery into Egypt and gave them the promised land which belonged to other people. Those other people were kicked out, and we've had this issue since then. I think God had a very bad management job.
Yes. And I think, I have heard from people who did go to Hebrew school when they were kids. As I said, I didn't, but I know from people who did. There were times in American Jewish history when young Jews were taught Israel was a land without a people for a people without a land. Because of, and you have to think about Jewish history. The entire Jewish population of England was kicked out of England at a certain, I don't remember what century. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Well, also in 1492, the entire Jewish population of Spain was told, you get out of here or you convert. And soon after they converted, the Inquisition started to see if they converted sincerely enough. Okay? So, were we a people without a land? Yeah, and it was not fun. Were there people already living there, both in biblical times and in the 1940s? Most definitely. And there are West Bank settlers who say the way to approach this geopolitical conflict is to say, God gave this land to Abraham. Therefore, it is ours. I do not think that's a good way to handle modern geopolitical situations. And the real tragedy of all this, if you want to bring the Bible into it, Abraham had 2 sons. And in Jewish history, Jewish, thought, the idea is Isaac was the father of the Jews and Ishmael the father of the Arabs. We're brothers. We should be brothers and sisters. And look what we are doing to each other. All right, I'm sorry, did somebody else, had you started to say something? Go ahead.
I believe that the Jewish people in Israel really look down on the Palestinians as second-class people. Mm-hmm. And I look at South Africa, where there is the apartheid or laws or whatever, but still there is the blacks are living in poverty and oppression. And I think that is the same pattern which would happen, or which is happening in Israel. Mm-hmm. And that really bothers me a lot.
Yeah. And so I think the example and the comparison to South Africa is constructive. Jimmy Carter, bless his heart, I don't know how many, like I'm going to guess maybe 20 years ago, wrote a book in which one of the things he said was, what's happening in Israel is like apartheid. And he got slammed for it. He was absolutely right. And let me be clear, because it's complicated. In Israel itself, 20% of the citizens of the state of Israel right now today are Palestinian. They are the descendants of people who did not get uprooted from their homes in 1948, and they've been there before, during, and since. And they are voting citizens of Israel. They vote in national elections. Some of them serve in the Knesset. They pay taxes. They are full citizens. Now, from what I read, it's not that they don't suffer discrimination. They do. But they are full voting, tax-paying citizens. In Gaza, what has been true is that Hamas was sort of running things on the ground day to day, but Israel controlled a lot of what happened because let's say you were living in Gaza and your child got accepted to study at an American university. Well, it wasn't your family who got to decide whether that happened. Israel does. There's no airport in Gaza. The child would have to be able to go through the border into Israel, get on an airplane in Tel Aviv, and fly to the United States. Israel controlled whether that happened. Israel controlled whether shipping could happen off the Mediterranean coast of the Gaza Strip. And I understand there are security reasons why Israel does not want an airport in Gaza and does not want ships coming in and out of Gaza, because they're concerned about weapons. But what it means is, or say you grow tomatoes, a year ago, say, you were growing tomatoes in Gaza and you wanted to ship your tomatoes to Cyprus. Israel decides whether you can put those tomatoes on a boat and send them to Cyprus, or whether they have to be in a truck and line up at a long line of trucks waiting to go through the border control to drive to Cyprus.
No wonder Hamas got so much power because
Yes.
of all this oppression.
Correct.
I mean, the oppression continues.
Yes, so it continues. So Palestinian residents of Gaza were very much controlled by the state of Israel, but could not vote in those elections, are not a citizen of that state. And in the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority has some day-to-day authority there. But Israel, and only Israel, decides whether and when and how many and where new settlements are going to go. There are all these roads that are only for settlers to drive on, and Palestinians have no say in where those go or how much Palestinian land is taken to create them. They do not get to vote in Israeli elections, although Israel is controlling so much of their day-to-day lives. Israel decides where checkpoints go. I'm not talking about a checkpoint into Israel. I'm talking about from one town on the West Bank to another town on the West Bank. You want to go visit your aunt in another town? You may or may not have to go through Israeli checkpoints. You don't get any say as a resident of the West Bank in where these checkpoints go. Also, the Jewish settlers in the West Bank live under Israeli civilian law. The Palestinian residents of the West Bank live under Israeli military law. This is apartheid. This is absolutely apartheid. I wouldn't say it's apartheid for the Palestinian citizens of the state of Israel who vote and pay taxes and all that and serve in the Knesset. But for all the other Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, absolutely it's apartheid. Yes.
So the controlling factor is the Israeli government.
Yes.
And what influence or impact or anything can be put to them to see some of this stuff the way others see it? Yeah, I mean, politically, Netanyahu wants to stay in power, so he doesn't go to jail. I mean, that's reality. But nobody can influence him, and the U.S. government isn't doing much to do that.
Well, I know that younger people in my life who are thinking they might have trouble voting for the Democratic candidate for president, and I'm not assuming anything about who you all are voting for or anything like that, but what they are saying to me is, we are, I think you used the word complicit, we are complicit in that we provide the arms and the money. So one thing the American government could do is not do that, right? Again, seems like a kind of argument attracted to Quakers, right? Let's not provide weapons. Let's not fund weapons. That might be a way to influence them. Now, as some of you have said, I don't know that the current government is influenceable. But the Israeli public is very disenchanted with the current government. I don't think for the reasons we've been talking about, but because there are still hostages being held. So at some point, hopefully soon, it's going to be a different Israeli government. We hope. And maybe Mr. Netanyahu will finally go to jail. Sorry, I should not have said, but anyway, yeah. Yes.
I think there's another wild card in that, in addition to Christianity and Hebrew religions, there's Islam in that area. And the thing I find troubling about Islam is it was not a religion of persuasion. It was a religion that conquered. And
I think it was some of both, but definitely, yes, some just conquering.
Yeah, if you didn't want to convert and they had the majority in control, your choice was to either become a slave or die, right? And that's that's not a good basis to have there as a wild card in the situation. I'm happy to have heard what you had to say in your program, but I think that for Palestinians and the Jewish states need to have their own access to certain minimum things. And so that situation, land-wise, seems totally unworkable to me. I mean, your thoughts, I think, are welcome and honorable, but I don't see how humanity, as humans and our flawed lives, how we can live that way. It seems to me that the two groups have to sit down together, if it's possible, and work out a solution where they distribute the land in a more equitable way. And then they each have their land, right? Because that starts you off. You know, Germany has their land, France has their land, and they all have their own little troubles. But I just think that like access to the sea and the river, they both need that.
Yep.
And so.
Yeah, I don't know that, I do know that this is not immediately realistic. I do hope that it is eventually realistic. And I agree with you, it might have been better if we were in a situation where they each could have a piece of land that only they lived on. And that might be more realistic in terms of human nature. That's not possible anymore. There is no piece of land where there can be a Palestinian state because of all the settlers. So I'm hoping, and the whole point of a land for all, as you saw in everything I read, they said, it will be negotiated, we will work out. The whole idea is that Jews and Palestinians are doing this together and agreeing on what the security arrangements will be and how many refugees can come back and over what time period and what the compensation is going to look like and all that kind of stuff would have to be negotiated. Not by you and me, but by the people who live there. Yeah.
Karen, did you have a final thought, perhaps?
I don't know if it's a final thought, but I think that, the Europeans are that group of people who decided, England and American and who else it was, they really wanted to get rid of Jews. And they decided they should have a homeland so they wouldn't have to deal with them anymore. And so it really goes back where it was not a solution for the Jewish people, really. It's because they decided that the land would be theirs now. And Palestinians were not consulted at all.
Right.
And that's where the hate comes from. And when you talk to some Jewish people in Israel, and they say, well, what happened in Auschwitz or in Germany, that's the justification what they do now in Palestine, and that is it's just horrible. And that's a justification.
Sarah, any concluding comments or?
I hope you will go to this website and look at it and see if you want to support them in any way whatsoever. And if you know anyone else who might like the presentation, please let me know. And thank you so much for the opportunity.